Returning to the worthless inheritance his grandfather left him, veteran Harry Parker only hoped to find some final peace. But his loyal dog, Ghost, began to act strangely. He barked incessantly at the old, dilapidated treehouse they called the fortress, a persistent and urgent bark, not for a wild animal, but as if he was trying to warn Harry about something hidden inside. Trusting his companion, Harry found an old locked chest, an object that shouldn't have been there. He soon realized this wasn't a forgotten childhood memento, but a Pandora's box containing a secret his grandfather had buried for 70 years. A secret that could explain why he was left out of the will, and also a truth that could make him face dangerous forces he knew nothing about. What, in the end, was hidden inside that chest? Please support us by subscribing to the channel to find out together. The law office of Mr. Anderson smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and quiet disappointment. It was a small, stuffy room in downtown Port Angeles, Washington, where the salty air of the strait seemed to be held at bay by thick, unopenable windows. Harry Parker sat perfectly still on a hard wooden chair, his back straight, a posture drilled into him over a decade in the Army. His hands rested on his knees. Beneath the heavy oak table, his companion, Ghost, lay silently, a warm and steady weight across his worn leather boots. Ghost was a 5-year-old German shepherd, his magnificent coat a cascade of gray and white that gave him an almost ethereal appearance in the dim light. He was a calm and watchful soul, bred for loyalty, and now his entire world consisted of the man whose feet he was guarding. He could sense the tension in the room, the low thrum of anxiety coming from his human, and his ears twitched at the dry rustle of paper in the lawyer's hands. Harry was a white man in his mid-30s, tall and lean, but with a healthy resilience etched into his frame. His brown hair, cut short in a practical military style, was beginning to show the first signs of silver at the temples. His face was weathered, carved by the suns of foreign deserts and the stress of a life most people in this room could never imagine. But his green eyes held a deep kindness and a quiet, observant nature. A neatly trimmed beard covered a strong jaw that was now set in a firm line. He wore a simple gray t-shirt under an unbuttoned flannel shirt of navy blue and charcoal, its soft, worn fabric a stark contrast to the stiff formality of his surroundings. Across from him sat his cousin, Joe Parker. Joe was the opposite of Harry in nearly every way. Where Harry was lean, Joe was soft and thick-set, his expensive suit straining slightly at the shoulders. His face was clean-shaven and florid, and his eyes darted impatiently from the lawyer to his gold watch and back again. He radiated an aura of restless ambition, a man who saw the towering forests of the Olympic Peninsula not as a place of wonder, but as columns of figures on a ledger. Mr. Anderson, the lawyer, was an elderly man who had served the Parker family for 2 generations. His white hair was thin, and he peered over a pair of thick spectacles, his expression one of neutral solemnity. He was a man who had delivered both fortunes and heartbreaks from this same mahogany desk for 50 years. Other relatives, aunts and uncles and their spouses, filled the remaining chairs, their hushed whispers ceasing the moment Mr. Anderson cleared his throat. The reading of the last will and testament of Benjamin Parker began. The lawyer's voice was a dry monotone, listing assets with dispassionate precision. The main family home, a sprawling log cabin with views of the mountains, along with all its contents, was bequeathed to his grandson, Joe Parker. Harry felt a small, tight knot form in his stomach. The portfolio of stocks and bonds, a considerable sum according to the murmurs of his aunts, was also bequeathed to Joe Parker. The 312 acres of prime timberland, the heart of the Parker family legacy, land that had been in their family since the early 1900s, was bequeathed to his grandson, Joe Parker. Harry stared at a spot on the aged Persian rug, focusing on the intricate pattern, trying to keep his breathing even. He could feel Ghost shift beneath the table, a low, almost inaudible rumble vibrating from the dog's chest. He reached down, his fingers finding the thick fur on Ghost's neck, and the rumbling subsided. He hadn't expected the world. He knew he had drifted from his grandfather in the years after he left the service, struggling to find his footing in a civilian world that felt foreign and loud. The calls had become less frequent, the visits shorter. But his grandfather, Ben, was the one who had taught him everything that mattered. He had taught him how to read a compass, how to identify the call of an osprey, how to be quiet and listen to the story the forest told. He couldn't believe Ben would forget him entirely. Finally, after all the significant assets had been dispensed, Mr. Anderson paused. He adjusted his glasses and read the final item. His voice seemed to soften with a hint of something that might have been pity. To my grandson, Harry Parker, who shared my love for the quiet places and the old stories, I leave a piece of that memory. I give to him sole ownership of the parcel of land registered as the Lone Oak Meadow, a plot of 2 acres located on the western edge of the main property. A stifled cough came from Aunt Carol. Joe Parker leaned back in his chair, a slow, self-satisfied smirk spreading across his face. He knew, as they all did, what the Lone Oak Meadow was. It was a beautiful but utterly useless piece of land. Harry knew it better than anyone. It was a steep, rocky hillside, impossible to build on. It was landlocked with no public road access. The only way in was through the main property, the property that now belonged to Joe. And worst of all, years ago, to protect the magnificent ancient Gary oak tree that stood at its center, Grandpa Ben had placed the plot under a scenic conservation easement. Nothing could be built, nothing could be logged. It was legally and physically worthless. His inheritance was a memory, a beautiful, inaccessible, unsellable memory. Joe leaned forward, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Well, Harry, at least you get to keep your old playground." The words hung in the air, sharp and humiliating. Harry felt his face flush with heat, a mix of anger and profound sorrow. But he did not speak. He did not give them the satisfaction. When Mr. Anderson slid the papers across the desk, Harry stood, his movements calm and deliberate. He signed his name with a steady hand, his signature a clean, sharp line on the page. He gave a single, curt nod to the room and turned to leave. "Come on, Ghost," he said, his voice low. The big shepherd rose in a single fluid motion and padded silently behind him. Outside, the cool, damp air of the Pacific Northwest felt like a blessing. It washed over him, clearing the stuffy, cloying atmosphere of the office from his lungs. He and Ghost walked a block in silence before stopping at the edge of a small park overlooking the harbor. Ferries glided across the gray water under a sky the color of pearl. Harry finally let his composure crumble. He knelt, burying his face in the thick fur of Ghost's neck. The dog whined softly and pushed his head against Harry's chest, a solid, living anchor in a world that had just been pulled out from under him. "It's not the money, boy," Harry whispered into the dog's ear, his voice thick with emotion. "I never cared about the money. But he left me nothing. He left me a ghost, a memory I can't even get to." He felt erased, judged, as if his entire life, his service, his struggles, meant less to his grandfather than Joe's ambition. As if Ben had looked at him and seen only the boy in the treehouse, not the man he had become. The treehouse, the fortress they had called it, a rickety platform of scavenged boards high in the branches of the ancient oak. It had been their sanctuary, their castle, their entire world. A new feeling began to replace the hurt, not anger, but a deep, driving need to understand. His grandfather had been a deliberate man. He never did anything without a reason. There had to be a reason for this. He stood up, wiping his eyes on the sleeve of his flannel shirt. He looked down at Ghost, whose intelligent brown eyes were fixed on his, waiting for a command, a direction. For the first time all day, Harry knew what he had to do. "Come on, boy," he said, his voice clearer now, filled with a new, uncertain purpose. "Let's go see our fortress." The drive out of town was a journey through a landscape of memories. Harry Parker drove his old pickup truck west, away from the harbor and toward the dense, green foothills of the Olympic Mountains. Ghost sat in the passenger seat, his head held high, sniffing the air through the half-open window. The familiar scent of damp earth, salt, and pine filled the cab. Every curve in the road, every bridge over a rushing, stony river was tied to a memory of his grandfather, Ben Parker. This was the road they took for fishing trips, for hikes, for the simple pleasure of driving into the wild heart of the peninsula. To get to his inheritance, Harry had to park on the shoulder of a logging road and walk. He crossed onto the main property, now legally Joe's, feeling like a trespasser on his own history. He and Ghost followed a faint deer trail, the ground soft with fallen needles under their feet. After a 10-minute walk, the dense canopy of firs and hemlocks gave way, and they stepped into the clearing. The Lone Oak Meadow. It was exactly as he remembered, a gentle 2-acre slope of wild grass and ferns surrounded on all sides by the towering dark woods. And in its center, magnificent and solitary, stood the tree. It was an ancient Gary oak, a giant whose sprawling moss-covered branches seemed to hold up the sky. It was a king in a kingdom of conifers. High in its boughs, weathered and gray, sat the fortress. Grandpa Ben had only passed away a few weeks ago, so the treehouse, while battered by years of wind and rain, was still structurally sound. Ben had always made sure of it, reinforcing a floorboard here, replacing a rope on the ladder there. It was his connection to their shared past, too. Harry took a deep breath. "Come on, boy." Ghost trotted at his heels, whining softly, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Harry gripped the old, thick rope of the ladder and began to climb. The inside of the fortress smelled of decaying wood, dust, and the faint, sweet scent of old rainwater. It was larger than he remembered from childhood, a simple platform with a low railing and a slanted roof. In one corner sat a stack of his old comic books, their pages swollen and warped. In another lay a wooden knife he had carved under his grandfather's patient eye. His gaze swept the dusty floorboards, and then he saw it. Tucked in the driest corner, partially hidden by a stiff, faded canvas tarp, was a small wooden chest. It was old, made of dark, heavy wood, and bound with straps of rusted iron. A thick, archaic padlock, the color of rust and time, held it shut. Harry's heart skipped a beat. He knelt and pulled the chest into the light. It was heavy, solid. He tugged at the lock, but it wouldn't budge. A surge of frustration washed over him. Here was something, a tangible piece of his grandfather's life, but it was locked away from him. He looked around the small space, his eyes scanning the walls for a hidden key, a clue, anything. And then he saw it. On the main support beam that rose through the center of the floor, he saw the carving they had made together one summer afternoon. In the clumsy letters of a child, it said B+H, enclosed in a lopsided heart. He ran his fingers over the faded lines, a sad smile touching his lips. But his fingers brushed against something else, something new. Next to their old carving was a symbol, freshly etched into the wood. The lines were clean and sharp against the dark, weathered grain. It was a simple image, a flat, oval shape, and beneath it, 3 wavy parallel lines. Harry stared at it, his brow furrowed in concentration. It meant nothing to him. And yet it felt familiar, like a half-forgotten dream. He closed his eyes, leaning his head against the rough wood of the beam, and let his mind drift. The scent of the old wood, the sound of the wind in the great oak's leaves. The memory came back to him in a sun-drenched flash. He was 10 years old, the summer of 1999. It was a hot, clear day, and the air was buzzing with the sound of insects. He and Grandpa Ben were down at the creek that marked the edge of the meadow. His grandfather, a man with strong, calloused hands and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, was teaching him how to skip stones. Ben had a special stone he called his magic stone. It was a perfect piece of slate, flat and oval and smooth, that he could make dance across the water 7, 8, sometimes 9 times. After a while, Ben sat back against the small retaining wall they had built together out of river rocks to stop the bank from eroding. "Every man needs a secret place to keep his treasures, Jack," Ben had said, his voice warm and thoughtful. A place no one can find unless they know exactly where to look. He had then reached for a specific rock in the wall, one that looked just like all the others, and pulled it free. Behind it was a small, dark hollow. He placed his magic skipping stone inside. "See," he said, sliding the rock back into place. "Safe and sound." The image in his mind was so clear it was as if he was there again. The oval stone, the wavy lines of the creek. Harry's eyes snapped open. He knew. He scrambled down the ladder so fast he nearly missed the last rung. Ghost, sensing the sudden shift in energy, began to bark with excitement, his tail wagging furiously. Harry ran across the meadow, his boots sinking into the soft earth, the dog bounding joyfully beside him. He reached the creek and found the low stone wall, now covered in a thick blanket of green moss. His heart pounded in his chest. He knelt, running his hands over the cool, damp stones, searching for the loose one. He pushed and pulled at several before his fingers found it. A rock about the size of a loaf of bread shifted under his touch. He worked his fingers into the crack and pulled. The rock came free, revealing a dark, earthy-smelling hollow. And there, nestled inside and wrapped in a piece of old, cracked oilskin, was a heavy, old-fashioned iron key. He held it in his palm, the cold metal a solid link to his grandfather, to a memory he thought he had lost. It was a key left not for a stranger, but for the boy who had once hidden a magic stone by the water. He returned to the fortress, his movements now slow and deliberate. He knelt before the chest, the iron key feeling heavy and significant in his hand. He pushed it into the keyhole of the ancient padlock. It slid in with a grating sound. He turned it. With a loud, dry click that echoed in the quiet treehouse, the lock sprang open. Harry took a deep breath and lifted the heavy wooden lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, were three things: a thick, leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with time; a single, ornate silver key, small and intricate, that seemed to hum with a secret energy of its own; and underneath them, a small black-and-white photograph, faded at the edges, of a young man in a soldier's uniform. The mystery his grandfather had left him was just beginning. The afternoon light slanted through the gaps in the treehouse walls, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Harry Parker sat on the weathered floorboards, the open chest before him. Ghost had settled nearby, his body a warm, solid presence, his head resting on his paws, but his watchful eyes never left his master. Harry picked up the photograph first. The black-and-white image was small, its edges softened by time. It showed a young man in an American Army uniform, not much older than 20. It was unmistakably his grandfather, Ben Parker, but a version of him Harry had never known. The familiar kind eyes were there, but the face was smoother, less etched by the worries of a long life. Standing beside him was a young woman with a gentle smile and dark hair that fell in soft waves around her shoulders. She was beautiful, but her eyes held a hint of a deep, unshakable sadness. In her arms, she held a bundled infant. Harry turned the photograph over. On the back, in his grandfather's neat, careful script, were three words: Ben, Ingrid, and Jennifer. Ingrid, Jennifer. Names he had never heard before. A woman and a child who were not part of the Parker family history he had been taught. He placed the photo down gently and picked up the leather-bound journal. The cover was soft and worn, and the pages within were filled with his grandfather's handwriting. The ink faded from dark blue to a soft gray. He opened it to the first page. The entry was dated May 1955. My name is Benjamin Parker, and I am a soldier stationed near a small town in West Germany. The war has been over for a decade, but the scars remain, on the land and on the people. I am writing this because there are some stories a man cannot speak aloud, but that he must not let die. Harry's breath caught in his throat. He began to read, and the world of the dusty treehouse faded away, replaced by the story of a young soldier in a defeated land. Ben wrote of meeting Ingrid, a local woman who had lost her entire family in the war. He wrote of their quiet, hesitant love, a small flower of hope growing in the rubble of a broken world. And then he wrote of the birth of their daughter. "We named her Jennifer," he wrote, "because even in the darkest of times, she was a gift. She had my eyes and her mother's smile." For one short year, we were a family. We were happy. The journal then took a darker turn. Ben wrote of Ingrid falling ill with a sickness that the post-war doctors had no medicine for. He wrote of holding her hand as she faded away, leaving him alone with their infant daughter. He was a foreign soldier, with orders to return to America soon. He had no family in Germany, no way to care for a child on his own. The pain in his grandfather's words was a raw, living thing, reaching across 70 years. "I made a choice," Ben wrote, "the hardest choice of my life. A kind captain in my unit and his wife, they couldn't have children of their own. They loved Jennifer from the moment they saw her. They were good people. They offered to adopt her, to give her a life in America, a life I could not provide. I told myself it was for the best. I signed the papers. I let them take my daughter. I have regretted it every single day since." Harry had to stop reading. He closed his eyes, a profound ache spreading through his chest. This was the secret his grandfather had carried. A hidden grief, a lost family. It explained so much. The moments of quiet sadness he had sometimes seen in Ben's eyes, the deep-seated sorrow that even a lifetime of peace and family in America could not erase. He continued reading. The journal spanned decades, with entries made every few years. Ben wrote of returning to Washington, of marrying Harry's grandmother, of building a life and a new family. But the ghost of Jennifer was always there. He wrote of trying to find her in the 1970s, but the adoption records had been sealed, and the captain and his wife had vanished into the vastness of America. "I failed her twice," he wrote, in an entry from 1995, "once when I gave her away, and again when I could not find her. I know Joe sees this land as timber and money. He is a good boy, but his heart does not hear the music of the forest. You, Harry, you were always different. You hear it. That is why I must trust this to you." The final entry was dated only a few months ago. "I am an old man now. My time is short. I have set things in motion, a final attempt to right a lifetime of wrong. The silver key opens a post office box in town. It is the beginning of a path I laid long ago. It is a path to a legacy I created for her, a piece of this land that I kept safe, a place worthy of her name. I pray you are the one reading this, Harry. I pray you will finish the journey for me. Find her, or find what is left of her. Do not let her memory be lost to the wind." Harry finally understood. The will wasn't a punishment. It was a test, a carefully constructed puzzle, left for the one person his grandfather believed would care enough to solve it. He hadn't been disinherited. He had been entrusted with a mission. He looked at the small, ornate silver key. It was no longer just a piece of metal. It was a promise. It was the start of a journey to correct a 70-year-old mistake, the beginning of the path to Jennifer's legacy. He felt a surge of purpose, a clarity he hadn't felt since he'd taken off his uniform for the last time. He had a mission again, not for his country, but for his grandfather, for a family he never knew he had. He carefully placed the journal and the photograph back into the chest. He pocketed the small silver key. He stood up, his body feeling lighter, his mind sharp and focused. Ghost rose with him, sensing the change in his master's demeanor, his tail giving a short, hopeful wag. "Come on, boy," Harry said, his voice firm and clear. "We have a trip to make." As they climbed down from the fortress and walked back across the meadow, the setting sun broke through the clouds, casting long, golden shadows. The ancient oak tree stood silhouetted against the light, its branches reaching out like loving arms. For the first time, Harry didn't see the worthless plot of land his cousin had mocked. He saw a sanctuary, a starting point. He saw a fortress not just of memory, but of hope. The next morning, for the first time in years, Harry Parker woke with a clear sense of purpose. The gnawing unease that had been his constant companion since leaving the army was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused energy. He moved with the quiet efficiency of his old life, making coffee, checking his gear, his mind already mapping out the day. Ghost watched him from his spot on the rug, sensing the change. The aimless, heavy-footed man from yesterday was gone. The soldier had returned. The Port Angeles post office was a plain, functional building of brick and glass. Inside, the air hummed with the quiet bustle of a weekday morning. People stood in line, mailing packages, buying stamps, their faces etched with the ordinary concerns of daily life. Harry felt strangely separate from them all, a man carrying a 70-year-old secret in his pocket. The small, ornate silver key felt both impossibly heavy and wonderfully light in his hand. He found the wall of brass-fronted post office boxes. His eyes scanned the numbers until he found it. Box 314. It was in a low corner, tarnished with age, looking as if it hadn't been opened in a very long time. He knelt, Ghost sitting faithfully beside him, a silent, furry sentinel. His hand was steady as he inserted the silver key. It turned smoothly, silently. He pulled the small brass door open. Inside was a single, thick manila envelope, yellowed with age. There was no name, no address, just the box number typed on a small label. He took the envelope, his heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He closed the box, retrieved his key, and walked out into the bright, cool morning air. He didn't open it right away. This was not something to be read in a truck or on a park bench. He drove back to his small rented apartment on the edge of town, a place that had always felt temporary, a place to exist, but not to live. He sat at his small kitchen table, the envelope lying before him. Ghost came and rested his heavy head on Harry's knee, a familiar gesture of comfort and support. With a deep breath, Harry broke the brittle seal. Inside were 2 sets of documents. The first was a thick sheaf of legal papers bound with a blue ribbon. The language was dense and formal, full of clauses and statutes that he struggled to understand. But the key phrases leaped out at him. Irrevocable trust. Beneficiary, Jennifer Parker, and her legal descendants. The principal asset. Harry's eyes widened as he read the description. The documents laid out, in precise legal terms, the creation of a separate, protected parcel of land. 30 years ago, his grandfather, Ben Parker, had legally severed 80 acres from the main Parker property. 80 acres of the most valuable, untouched old-growth forest in the entire area. The land was officially and legally named the Jennifer Preserve. It was a staggering revelation. His grandfather hadn't just felt regret. He had taken concrete, brilliant action. He had protected a piece of his heart, a piece of his legacy, and kept it safe for the daughter he had lost. Beneath the legal documents was a second envelope, this one thinner and made of personal stationery. On the front, in his grandfather's familiar hand, was written a single word, Harry. He opened it. The letter inside was dated just 6 months ago. My dearest Harry, if you are reading this, then my last hope has been fulfilled. It means you did not turn your back on the fortress. It means that the part of you that I always cherished, the part that values memory and loyalty over money and land, is still alive and well. Forgive an old man's theatrics, but the will was a test. I had to be sure. Joe is a good man, but his eyes see the world in dollars and cents. I needed a soldier for this mission, Harry. I needed you. The papers you hold are the legal proof of what I did 30 years ago. I created a sanctuary for Jennifer, the daughter I lost. It is her birthright, a piece of this land that belongs to her and to her children, should she have any. It is protected, legally separate from everything else. Joe cannot touch it, cannot sell it. It is safe, but a legacy is meaningless if it is never claimed. My search for Jennifer failed. I grew old and tired, and the trail went cold decades ago. But I never gave up hope. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to finish what I could not. Find her, Harry. Find my Jennifer, or find her descendants. Show them these papers. Tell them the story. Bring them home to the land that has been waiting for them. This is my true last will and testament. The rest was just noise. I am leaving you with a great burden, I know, But I am also leaving you with a purpose. Sometimes, a soldier needs a mission to find his way home. I love you, grandson. Make me proud. Grandpa Ben. Harry read the letter once, then twice, the words blurring through a film of tears. The weight of his grandfather's love and trust washed over him, healing the wound that the public reading had inflicted. He felt a powerful surge of elation, of purpose so intense it was almost dizzying. He had a mission, a real, tangible mission that mattered. But as the initial rush faded, a new feeling began to creep in. Doubt. It started as a small, cold knot in his stomach and spread through him, chilling and heavy. He looked around his small, bare apartment. He was a man who had been struggling to keep his own life together. He had no investigative skills, limited money, and a trail that had been cold for half a century. His grandfather had placed his life's greatest regret, his most profound hope, into his hands. What if he failed? The weight of the responsibility felt immense, suffocating. He was not the hero his grandfather believed him to be. He was just a man, lost in a drift. And he bowed his head, resting his forehead on the cool wood of the table, the weight of his own inadequacy pressing down on him. The silence in the room felt vast and empty. Then he felt a gentle, persistent nudge against his arm. He looked up. Ghost was standing beside him, his big, intelligent eyes fixed on Harry's face. The dog whined softly, a low, questioning sound. He nudged Harry's arm again, more insistently this time, as if to say, "What is it? What's our next move?" Looking into those unwavering, loyal eyes, Harry saw no doubt. He saw no judgment. He saw only a simple, profound, and absolute trust. Ghost didn't know the details of the mission, didn't understand the complexities or the odds. He only knew that his human was in pain and that wherever Harry went, he would follow. He was ready. A slow strength began to return to Harry. The doubt didn't vanish, but it receded. His grandfather had needed a soldier, and a soldier does not let the difficulty of the mission stop him from trying. He does not let fear of failure dictate his actions. He takes the first step. Harry sat up straight. He reached out and stroked Ghost's head, his fingers sinking into the thick, soft fur. "Okay, boy," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "You're right. We have work to do." He picked up the legal documents again. The trail started with a name, Jennifer Parker, and a city, Seattle. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. It was a direction. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Seattle was a world of concrete, glass, and ceaseless noise. After the quiet forests and the slow rhythm of life in Port Angeles, the city felt like a foreign country to Harry. He drove his truck through the dense traffic, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. In the passenger seat, Ghost sat alert and tense, his ears swiveling to catch every new sound, the hiss of bus brakes, the distant cry of a siren, the murmur of 1,000 conversations. The big shepherd pressed close to Harry, a furry anchor of familiarity in a sea of overwhelming newness. Their first stop was a skyscraper downtown, a gleaming tower that housed the law firm that had drafted his grandfather's trust 30 years ago. A polite but firm paralegal confirmed that the trust for Jennifer Parker was indeed real, but all other information, especially concerning descendants, was protected by client confidentiality. It was a dead end, a wall of professional courtesy that Harry could not breach. The next 2 days were a frustrating exercise in bureaucratic patience. Harry spent hours at the King County Public Records Office, a sterile, quiet place that smelled of old paper and disinfectant. He scrolled through digitized archives, his eyes straining at the faint, spidery script of old documents. He searched for Jennifer Parker. It was like searching for a ghost. On the afternoon of the second day, he found her, a marriage certificate from 1982. Jennifer Parker had married a man named Raj Sharma. With a new name to search for, the trail grew warmer. He found a death certificate for Jennifer Sharma, dated 5 years ago. He stared at the cold official text, a wave of sadness washing over him. The aunt he had never known was gone. He had been too late. But then he found one more document, A birth certificate from 1985 for a daughter, Anya Sharma. Mother, Jennifer Sharma. Maternal grandfather, Benjamin Parker. There it was. A name, a living person. His mission was not over. A quick search online filled in the rest of the story, and Harry felt a jolt of astonished irony. Dr. Anya Sharma was not just anyone. She was an associate professor of botany at the University of Washington, a respected expert in the ecology of old-growth forests of the Pacific Northwest. The university campus was an oasis of green in the heart of the city. Ancient trees and manicured lawns surrounded stately brick buildings. Following a campus map, Harry found the botany department and its associated greenhouses. He left Ghost in the truck with the windows cracked, promising to be back soon. He found Dr. Anya Sharma in a large, humid greenhouse, a place filled with the rich, earthy scent of damp soil and living plants. She was standing at a long metal table, carefully measuring a soil sample. She was a woman in her late 30s, with intelligent, focused brown eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her long, dark hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and she wore sturdy work pants, hiking boots, and a simple gray t-shirt. Her movements were precise and economical, the movements of a scientist who was completely at home in her work. She was absorbed in what she was doing, a picture of calm, intellectual concentration. "Excuse me, Dr. Sharma," Harry said, his voice feeling rough and out of place in the quiet green space. She looked up, her expression neutral but questioning. There was no immediate warmth, only a polite, professional curiosity. "Yes, can I help you?" "My name is Harry Parker. I'm from Port Angeles. I was hoping to talk to you about a specific parcel of land out on the peninsula. It belonged to my grandfather, Ben Parker." At the mention of the name Parker and the land, a flicker of something new came into her eyes. A sharp, intense interest. She put down her tools and gave him her full attention. "I'm familiar with the Parker property," she said, her voice crisp and clear. "I've been trying to get research access to a section of it for years, an unmapped 80-acre parcel of old growth on the western boundary. But your grandfather repeatedly denied my requests." "That's the one," Harry said, his heart beginning to beat a little faster. "The Jennifer Preserve." Anya's eyes narrowed slightly. "How do you know that name? That designation isn't on any public map." "It's a long story," Harry said. He felt he was on the edge of a cliff. He had to take the leap. "My grandfather passed away recently. He left me something, a journal, and some legal papers. It turns out that land, the 80 acres you've been studying, doesn't belong to the main Parker estate. It was put into a private trust 30 years ago." "For whom?" Anya asked, her skepticism evident. "For his daughter, a woman named Jennifer," Harry said, watching her face carefully. "For your mother." Anya stared at him, her professional composure finally cracking. A look of complete and utter disbelief crossed her face. "I think you have the wrong person, Mr. Parker. My mother was an orphan. Her parents died when she was an infant." "That's what she was told," Harry said gently. He opened the worn satchel he was carrying and carefully took out the documents from the post office box. He didn't hand her the journal or the photograph. Not yet. He handed her the official notarized legal deed for the trust. My grandfather was her father. That makes him your grandfather. She took the papers, her hands trembling almost imperceptibly. She read them, her scientist's eyes scanning the legal language, her expression shifting from disbelief to confusion, and then to something else. A dawning, reluctant understanding. The legal document was undeniable. It was professionally drafted, properly filed, and it clearly named her mother, Jennifer Sharma, as the sole beneficiary of a trust containing one asset, the Jennifer Preserve. This is impossible," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. She looked up from the papers and stared at Harry, truly seeing him for the first time. She looked at his weathered face, his honest, tired eyes. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, her voice regaining some of its strength. "If this is real, what do you want?" "My grandfather's letter asked me to do one thing," Harry replied simply. "To find his daughter, or her descendants and tell them the truth, to bring them home to the land that has been waiting for them. Anya was silent for a long time, her mind clearly racing, trying to fit this impossible new information into the logical framework of her world. The story of a secret family was a wild, emotional tale that her scientific mind struggled to accept. But the legal deed in her hand was a hard, verifiable fact. And the land it described, it was a place she had dreamed of exploring for a decade. The chance to set foot in that pristine, untouched ecosystem was a siren call she could not ignore. "I don't know if I believe your story," she said finally, her voice steady. "But this document is real, and the land it describes is significant." "I know it's a lot to ask," Harry said, "but you need to see it." Anya looked from the paper to Harry's earnest face, and then out through the glass of the greenhouse towards the distant, hazy outline of the Olympic Mountains. Her curiosity, the driving force of her entire life, was at war with her skepticism. In the end, the scientist won. "I'll come to Port Angeles," she said, her decision made. "I need to see this land for myself." The drive back to Port Angeles was a long, quiet one. Anya Sharma sat in the passenger seat of Harry's truck, the legal documents resting in her lap, her gaze fixed on the blur of evergreen trees lining the highway. She was a scientist, trained to observe, to analyze, to trust in verifiable data. The story Harry had told her was anything but verifiable. It was a tale of secrets and regrets, a narrative that belonged in a novel, not in her well-ordered life. Yet the document in her hands was a fact. The 80 acres it described were a fact. And so she was silent, her mind working to reconcile the story with the data. Harry respected her silence. He understood that he had dropped a bomb into the middle of her existence, and the fallout would take time to settle. Ghost sat in the extended cab behind them, his presence a calm, steadying force. He seemed to understand the fragile truce that existed between the two humans and was content to watch the world go by, his occasional deep sigh the only sound in the quiet truck. They didn't go to the main Parker property. Instead, Harry pulled off onto a small, unmarked service road, the truck bumping along a dirt track that was barely visible. He stopped the engine and pulled an old folded piece of paper from the leather journal. It was a map, hand-drawn by his grandfather, Ben. "On the official county surveys, this area is mislabeled," Harry explained, his voice low. "Grandpa called it unstable terrain, a wetland. He made sure no one would ever have a reason to come looking. This is the only true map." Anya studied the careful, confident lines of the drawing, another piece of data, another fact about the man who was supposedly her grandfather. He had not only been a man of secrets, but of strategy. The hike was not long, but the forest was dense. They walked in single file, with Harry leading the way and Ghost padding silently behind Anya, occasionally nudging her hand with his wet nose as if to reassure her. Anya's scientific mind took over, observing the ecosystem around her. It was a healthy second-growth forest, a mix of Douglas fir and western hemlock, but nothing remarkable. It was beautiful, but it was ordinary. Then Harry stopped. They were standing before a sheer rock face, a wall of gray stone covered in moss and ferns. It looked like a dead end. "Here," Harry said, pointing to a narrow fissure between two enormous boulders, almost completely hidden by a curtain of drooping sword ferns. "The entrance doesn't look like much." Anya pushed aside the wet, heavy fronds and stepped through the gap, and the world changed. The air grew instantly cooler, hushed and still. The ordinary sounds of the outer forest fell away, replaced by a profound, cathedral-like silence. They were standing in a world of giants. All around them, ancient trees soared hundreds of feet into the air, their massive trunks wider than cars. Western red cedars with bark like shredded cinnamon rose from the earth, their fluted bases creating hollows, large enough for a person to stand in. Towering Douglas firs, their bark thick and deeply furrowed like the skin of some ancient beast, formed a canopy so high and dense that the sunlight filtered down in soft, hazy beams like the light through a stained glass window. Anya, the scientist, the woman of facts and figures, simply stopped. The breath left her lungs. Her professional detachment, her skepticism, all of it dissolved in a wave of pure, unadulterated awe. She had spent her entire career studying places like this from data points and satellite images, but she had never stood in the heart of one so pristine, so untouched. The air itself felt different, heavy with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and millennia of life. She slowly turned in a circle, her head tilted back, trying to take it all in. This is a climax ecosystem, she whispered, the words sounding small and inadequate in the vast silence. Some of these trees, they must be over 800 years old. Harry watched her, a quiet satisfaction settling in his heart. He was seeing the forest through her eyes, and finally understood the true scope of what his grandfather had protected. This was not just a piece of land. It was a living cathedral, a library of time. They walked deeper into the grove, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of moss and fallen needles. Anya pointed out rare species of lichen and fungi, her voice filled with a reverence that went beyond scientific interest. They came to a creek, its water so clear it looked like liquid glass, tumbling over smooth, mossy stones. It was then that Ghost, who had been ranging slightly ahead, suddenly froze. He stood stock still, his body rigid, his head low. A low, dangerous growl rumbled deep in his chest. His nose was pointed directly at the base of a colossal cedar tree near the creek bank. "What is it, boy?" Harry said softly, his hand instinctively going to the dog's neck. He and Anya moved cautiously toward the tree. As they got closer, they saw what had alerted Ghost. Tucked behind a curtain of hanging moss, almost invisible against the reddish-brown bark, was a small, neat slash of fluorescent orange survey paint. Anya's face hardened. She ran her fingers over the paint, a look of violation in her eyes. "Someone's been here," she said, her voice cold. Harry began scanning the area. His soldier's eyes, trained to spot things that were out of place, moved methodically over the surrounding trees. There, strapped to a fir tree about 30 yards away, partially hidden and painted a dull brown to blend in, was a small, modern trail camera. Its lens was pointed directly at the heart of the grove. The peaceful, sacred feeling of the forest evaporated, replaced by a harsh, ugly reality. This was not just their secret anymore. Pioneer Logging knew they had trespassed, surveyed, and spied on this sanctuary. The threat was not distant or theoretical. It was here, now. That evening, the sterile, impersonal motel room felt like a different planet from the ancient forest. The hum of the ice machine in the hallway and the flicker of the television in the next room were jarring intrusions. They had spoken little since leaving the woods, each lost in their own thoughts. Anya sat on the edge of one of the beds, staring at the worn floral bedspread. The awe of the afternoon was gone, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. Finally, she looked at Harry. "That journal," she said. "The one your grandfather wrote. May I read it?" Harry nodded, retrieved it from the chest, and handed it to her. He then took Ghost out for a long walk, sensing that she needed to face this part of the story alone. Anya sat under the dim light of the bedside lamp and began to read. She saw the photograph of the young soldier, the sad-eyed German girl, and the baby, her mother. She read the story of their love and their loss. She felt the raw pain in Ben Parker's words as he described giving his daughter away. She read of his lifelong regret, of his failed searches, and of his final, desperate plan to leave a legacy for a family he might never know. The names on the page, Ben, Ingrid, Jennifer, transformed from abstract data points into real people, with real heartbreaks. She looked at the picture of her mother as an infant and saw for the first time not just the woman who had raised her, but the lost child of a grieving soldier and a dying mother. She saw the unbroken line that stretched from a war-torn town in Germany, across an ocean, through decades of silence, to her, sitting in this lonely motel room. The forest was no longer just a priceless ecosystem she wanted to study. It was her inheritance. It was her mother's legacy. It was the final, desperate gift of a grandfather she had never met, and it was under threat. When Harry and Ghost returned, they found Anya sitting exactly where they had left her. The journal was closed in her lap. The tears on her face had dried, but her eyes burned with a new, fierce light. Her scientific detachment was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "This fight," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with absolute determination, "is mine now." The main Parker cabin stood on a rise overlooking a wide green valley. It was a place of warm memories for Harry. The smell of wood smoke from the stone chimney, the sound of his grandmother's laughter, the sight of his grandfather sitting on the wide front porch watching the eagles ride the thermal currents. But as he drove up the long gravel driveway the next morning, a feeling of cold dread settled in his stomach. This was not his home anymore. This was the front line. Anya was silent in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly around the folder containing the legal deed. Her scientific calm from the day before had been replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. Ghost sat behind them, his body tense, his ears erect. He sensed the purpose in their mission, and his usual calm demeanor had sharpened into a watchful, protective alertness. Joe's new, expensive pickup truck was parked near the front steps. When Harry pulled up, his cousin came out onto the porch. Joe was holding a cup of coffee, and his expression soured from surprise to irritation when he saw Harry behind the wheel. "What do you want, Harry?" Joe asked, his voice rough. "I thought we were done with all the family business." "We need to talk to you, Joe," Harry said, getting out of the truck. Ghost followed, staying close to Harry's side, his eyes fixed on Joe. "This is Dr. Anya Sharma." Anya stepped forward, her demeanor calm and professional. "Mr. Parker," she began, "I believe there has been a significant oversight regarding your grandfather's estate." Joe scoffed, looking her up and down with a dismissive air. "An oversight? The only oversight was Grandpa leaving you that useless patch of dirt, Harry. What is this, your lawyer? Going to sue me for a bigger piece of the pie?" "This isn't about that," Harry said, keeping his voice even. "This is about an 80-acre parcel of land that was never part of the main estate to begin with." Anya opened her folder and held out the legal deed. 30 years ago, Ben Parker placed 80 acres of the western old-growth forest into a private trust. It's called the Jennifer Preserve. Legally, it was never yours to inherit. It belongs to the beneficiary of that trust. Joe's face went pale as he stared at the document. He didn't take it from her, but he could clearly read the formal legal title. His scornful laughter was brittle, unconvincing. "This is ridiculous. Some kind of trick." "It's no trick," Anya said firmly. "The trust was established for your grandfather's daughter, Jennifer. I am her daughter. That land is legally mine." At that, Joe's facade of confidence completely shattered. The color drained from his face, replaced by a look of raw, cornered desperation. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting around wildly, like a trapped animal looking for an escape. "No," he stammered. "No, you don't understand. It can't be. I've already signed the preliminary contracts. Pioneer Logging, they've made a deposit. I've already spent it." "Spent it on what, Joe?" Harry asked, though he already suspected the answer. "On debts," Joe shouted, his voice cracking. "On loans. Do you think running this place is easy? The equipment, the taxes, the bad market 2 years ago? I was drowning. The deal with Pioneer was my only way out. They're not just buying the timber, they're buying the whole operation. That 80 acres, that was the prize. That's what made the deal so valuable." "So you knew about it," Harry said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You knew there was an old-growth forest there, and you didn't tell anyone. You were going to let them destroy it." "It's just trees, Harry," Joe yelled, his desperation making him cruel. "It's just trees that can finally make this family some real money, instead of just being some pretty view for you and Grandpa to get sentimental over." As their argument grew louder, the sound of another vehicle approaching made them all turn. A sleek black SUV, gleaming and out of place against the rustic backdrop of the cabin, purred up the driveway. It parked behind Harry's truck. A man in a tailored dark suit and perfectly polished shoes stepped out. He was in his 50s, with neatly styled gray hair and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Having some trouble, Joe?" the man asked, his voice smooth as silk. "Mr. Davies," Joe said, a wave of pathetic relief washing over his face. There's a problem." The man, Mr. Davies, the lawyer for Pioneer Logging, walked toward them, his cold eyes taking in the scene. He glanced at Harry and Ghost with disinterest, then focused on Anya and the document in her hand. "I see you've met the complication," he said to Joe, before turning to Anya. "Dr. Anya Sharma, I presume? We were wondering when you might turn up. My associates at the county records office are quite thorough." "You've been spying on me?" Anya asked, her voice tight with anger. "Let's call it due diligence," Davies replied with his chilling smile. "Now, I've seen a copy of that document, a lovely, sentimental piece of paper. Unfortunately, a 30-year-old private trust that has never been activated and has a deceased primary beneficiary? Our legal team is confident it won't stand up to a real court challenge." "It's a legally binding deed," Anya stated, "and we will be happy to dispute that. For years, if necessary." Davies took a step closer, his voice dropping to a confidential, threatening tone. "We will bury you in motions, depositions, and legal fees until you are begging us to take this land off your hands. Or you can be sensible. Pioneer Logging is prepared to offer you a generous sum to release your claim, $25,000, for a piece of paper." The insult was so profound it was breathtaking. $25,000 for a priceless, irreplaceable ecosystem. "The land is not for sale," Anya said, her voice like ice. Davies's smile tightened. "A pity. We tried to be reasonable." He turned to Joe. "We will handle this. Our contract with you remains in effect." Harry stepped forward. "That contract includes land that doesn't belong to Joe." At Harry's movement, Ghost, who had been sitting silently, rose to his feet. He didn't bark, but a low, deep growl rumbled in his chest, a clear warning. His body was positioned squarely between Harry and the lawyer. Davies's cold gaze fell on the dog, and for the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his face. "This is a family matter," Harry said, his eyes locked on his cousin. "You need to do the right thing, Joe." Joe, bolstered by the lawyer's presence, puffed out his chest. He looked at Harry, his expression an ugly mix of resentment and triumph. He gestured vaguely toward the lone oak meadow, which was just visible through a break in the trees. "The right thing? You want to talk about the right thing?" He let out a short, bitter laugh. "You know, even if some miracle happens and you win this fight, what do you really have, Harry? You have your precious memories, and you have that little fortress on a hill, but you can't even set foot on it without walking on my land. You're a king with no kingdom and no road to get there." The taunt hit its mark, a final, cruel twist of the knife. Harry stared at his cousin, seeing not the boy he had grown up with, but a stranger, a man so lost in his own desperation he was willing to sell his family's soul. He said nothing. He simply put a hand on Ghost's back, a silent command to stand down. He looked at Anya, whose face was a mask of cold fury, and gave a slight shake of his head. This was not the time or place. They turned and walked back to the truck, the feeling of defeat heavy in the air. They hadn't lost, not yet. But the front line had been drawn, and they now knew the full measure of the enemy they were facing. The small motel room, which had seemed sterile and impersonal before, now felt like a refuge. Harry Parker and Anya Sharma returned to it after their disastrous encounter with Joe and Mr. Davies, carrying with them not just the weight of defeat, but also a simmering, righteous anger. Ghost curled up on the rug near the door, his eyes following every movement, a silent witness to their frustration. They didn't speak for a long time. Anya paced the small space, her scientific mind, usually so precise, now buzzing with a chaotic mix of fury and fear. Harry sat on the edge of the bed, absently stroking Ghost's head, his thoughts a storm of tactical analysis and personal betrayal. Joe's cruel taunts about the fortress, about his inability to even access his own land, echoed in his ears. Finally, Anya stopped pacing and faced Harry. "This isn't just about the preserve anymore," she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "This is about family, about my grandfather, about my mother, about what's right." Harry looked up, meeting her gaze. He saw the same unwavering determination he felt in his own heart. "We're not going to let them win," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But how?" Anya threw her hands up in exasperation. "They have more money, more lawyers, more political power. They'll bury us in paperwork." Harry stood up. He walked to the window, looking out at the endless rain that had begun to fall, blurring the distant lights of Port Angeles. He saw not the rain, but the forest, vulnerable and ancient. He thought of his grandfather's words. "I needed a soldier for this mission, Harry." A soldier doesn't quit just because the odds are stacked against him. A soldier finds another way. "We fight them on their own terms," he said, turning back to Anya. "We can't beat them in a straight legal battle, not right now. But we can outmaneuver them. We can give the community a better option. We need a plan, a comprehensive plan, not just to stop them, but to show everyone the true value of the Jennifer Preserve." Anya's eyes, which had been dull with despair, now lit up with a spark of her usual scientific fervor. A plan. That she understood. Her mind, accustomed to complex research and detailed proposals, began to whir. She pulled out her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "We need a sustainable business model," she rattled off, more to herself than to Harry. "Ecotourism, scientific research opportunities, educational programs. We need projected revenue, job creation numbers, ecological impact studies. Something that proves the land is worth more standing than cut down. Something the county council will listen to." Harry joined her, his military training kicking in. He was a master of logistics, strategy, and resource management. "We need to map out the opposition," he said. "Who on the county council is beholden to Pioneer? Who can we sway? What's their timeline? We need to build a compelling narrative. We need to tell Grandpa Ben's story, Jennifer's story, your story." The motel room transformed into a war room. They worked for days, fueled by stale coffee, takeout food, and an unwavering resolve. Anya reached out to her colleagues at the University of Washington, economists specializing in sustainable development, environmental lawyers, tourism experts. She spent hours on video calls, her voice calm and authoritative, extracting data, projections, and persuasive arguments. Harry, meanwhile, delved into local politics, researching council members, identifying key influencers, and sketching out a communication strategy. Ghost lay under the table, a silent, furry partner, occasionally nudging their hands when they seemed to forget to eat or sleep. They were a formidable team. Harry, the strategist, the practical man of action, grounded in the realities of the fight. Anya, the scientist, brilliant and articulate, capable of turning complex ecological data into compelling arguments for preservation and sustainable growth. The differences that had initially created a cautious distance between them now blended into a powerful synergy. One evening, exhausted but exhilarated, they took a break. The motel room was a mess of papers, half-empty coffee cups, and discarded food wrappers. Anya leaned back in her chair, rubbing her tired eyes. "I never imagined," she began, then trailed off. "I never imagined any of this. I always felt like a piece of me was missing. My parents, they were wonderful, but there was always this unanswered question. My origins." Harry looked at her, truly seeing the woman beside him, not just his grandfather's descendant. He saw the quiet strength, the fierce intelligence, the hidden vulnerability. He thought of his own years adrift, of the feeling of being a puzzle with missing pieces. "Me too," he admitted softly. "Since I left the service, I've felt aimless, like a gun without a target. Grandpa Ben, he always knew what I needed. Even now." He gestured vaguely toward the window, towards the distant direction of the lone oak meadow. He told her a story he hadn't shared with anyone in years, a memory of the fortress. "You know, one time, I must have been about 7, I was up in the treehouse, and a storm rolled in. A real bad one. Thunder and lightning, the whole 9 yards. I was terrified, crying. Grandpa Ben climbed all the way up, even though he was already in his 50s then. He didn't try to make the storm go away. He just sat with me, and he told me stories. Stories about how the old oak had stood through 100 storms. Stories about how the roots run deep, even when you can't see them. He just sat with me until it passed, and I wasn't scared anymore. I felt safe." Anya listened, her scientific mind momentarily quieted by the raw humanity of the story. She imagined the old man, his strong, calloused hands comforting a frightened child. She saw a flicker of her grandfather, the same man who had hidden a legacy for his lost daughter. "And you know," she said, her voice soft, "I always felt the absence of a history. My adoptive parents were loving, but they couldn't give me the answers about where I came from. There was always a blank space, a longing for roots. When I read the journal, when I saw the preserve, it was like finding those roots, like finding a part of myself I didn't know existed. The preserve isn't just an ecosystem for me anymore. It's a family heirloom." Their eyes met across the cluttered table. In that moment, the cautious alliance forged in a Seattle greenhouse melted away. They were no longer just allies in a fight. They were family. Two people, brought together by a shared inheritance and a shared wound, finding connection in the midst of chaos. Ghost, sensing the shift in their energy, let out a soft sigh and nudged Harry's hand with his wet nose, a quiet affirmation of the bond that was forming. Over the next few days, their plan solidified. It was ambitious, meticulously detailed, and backed by solid research. They had a compelling economic case for ecotourism and sustainable forest management, a powerful ecological argument for preservation, and above all, a deeply human story to tell. They had a plan to save the Jennifer Preserve. And they had each other. Harry looked at the stack of documents, at the charts and graphs spread across the table. For the first time since his return from service, he knew where he belonged. He knew what his mission was, and he knew he wasn't alone. The fortress wasn't just a treehouse anymore. It was an idea, a symbol. It was their command center and their hope. The air was heavy with the promise of more rain as Harry Parker drove up the long gravel driveway to the main cabin one last time. He was alone. Anya had stayed back at the motel with the finalized proposal, ready to email it the second he gave the signal. Ghost sat in the passenger seat, a silent gray and white shadow, his gaze fixed on the house as it came into view. This was a mission Harry had to undertake by himself. It was not about legal deeds or business projections anymore. It was about family. Joe was on the porch, nervously pacing. He saw Harry's truck and his face hardened into a mask of defensive resentment. "What now, Harry?" he called out as Harry got out of the truck. "Come to throw some more impossible stories at me?" "I came to talk, Joe." "Just you and me," Harry said, his voice calm. He left the truck door open. Ghost remained in his seat, watching, a silent observer. Harry walked up the steps and handed his cousin a single, summarized sheet of their plan. He didn't hand him the whole intimidating binder, just the key points: the potential revenue from ecotourism, the immediate capital from selling carbon credits, the long-term job creation. He explained it not as an adversary, but as a brother might. "Look, Joe, I know you're in a tough spot," Harry began, his tone free of judgment. "Grandpa Ben didn't leave you an easy situation. The farm has been struggling for years, but selling it all to Pioneer, that's a one-time solution to a long-term problem. This is a way forward, a way to clear your debts and build something new, something that lasts, something that would make him proud." Joe took the paper, his eyes scanning the numbers. Harry could see a flicker of something in his cousin's expression. Not hope, but a reluctant curiosity. The numbers were good. Anya and her colleagues had made sure of that. For the first time, Joe was seeing a real, viable alternative to the deal that had felt like his only lifeline. "It's just a theory," Joe muttered, but the conviction was gone from his voice. "It's just numbers on a page. Pioneer has real money right now." Before Harry could respond, the sound of an approaching vehicle made them both turn. The sleek black SUV of Pioneer Logging's lawyer came purring up the driveway, an urban predator in this rustic world. But it wasn't Mr. Davies who stepped out this time. It was a different man, clearly higher up the corporate food chain. This was Mr. Warren, the regional director of acquisitions for Pioneer. He was a man in his late 40s, tall and thin, with silver hair slicked back from his forehead. He wore a crisp, dark gray suit that probably cost more than Harry's truck, and his smile was a bloodless, reptilian slash in his narrow face. "Joe, my friend," Warren boomed, his voice artificially hearty as he climbed the porch steps. "I was in the area, thought I'd stop by with the final contracts. We can get this all signed and done today, and that first check will be in your account by morning." His eyes flicked to Harry and the paper in Joe's hand, and his smile tightened. "Having a little family chat?" "This is my cousin Harry," Joe said nervously. "We were just discussing some things." Warren gave Harry a dismissive once-over, his gaze lingering for a moment on the open door of the old pickup, where Ghost's silhouette was clearly visible. He turned his attention back to Joe, placing a condescending hand on his shoulder. "Listen, Joe, I know these things can be emotional. Family history, all that nonsense. But we're businessmen, you and I. We deal in reality. And the reality is, this land is worth more as a product than as a memory. Your grandfather was a sentimental old man who let a fortune in timber rot on the stump." Harry's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting the man talk. "This whole business with the secret heir," Warren continued with a wave of his hand, "is a distraction, a legal hiccup. Our lawyers will tie it up in court for a decade if they have to. In the meantime, we have a contract with you for the undisputed 300 acres. We can begin logging those immediately while the rest gets sorted out." He saw the hesitation in Joe's eyes, and his tone hardened. He pulled a sheaf of papers and a gold pen from his inner jacket pocket. "It's time to decide, Joe. Are you a Parker who wants to sit on a pile of old firewood and tell stories? Or are you the Parker who finally turns this family's name into something that matters? Think of it. The Warren Parker Resort at Cascade Creek has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Once we're done, the only thing the Parker name will be good for is the sign on our new access road." The insult was so profound, so utterly contemptuous of their entire history, that it hung in the air like a physical blow. Joe flinched as if he'd been slapped. "This is our home," Harry said, his voice dangerously low. Warren finally turned his full, venomous attention on Harry. "Your home? You're the soldier boy who ran away, weren't you? Came back with nothing but a dog and a sad story. You have no say here." He took a step toward Harry, jabbing a finger aggressively at his chest. "This is a multi-million-dollar deal. You're a nobody. You will not interfere." In that instant, a blur of gray and white motion erupted from the truck. Ghost didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He moved with the silent, terrifying speed of a predator. He cleared the space between the truck and the porch in a heartbeat and planted himself squarely between Harry and Mr. Warren. His body was a rigid wall of muscle, his head was low, his lips were curled back from his teeth, and a growl, a sound that seemed to come from the very core of the earth, vibrated the wooden planks of the porch. It was not the sound of an angry dog. It was the sound of controlled, lethal force, a promise of violence held barely in check. Mr. Warren, the man of suits and contracts, screamed. It was a short, pathetic yelp of pure terror. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own expensive shoes, and fell in a heap against the porch railing. Joe stood frozen, his face as white as a sheet. He stared, not at the terrified executive, but at the scene before him. He saw the naked greed and contempt on Warren's face. He heard the man's casual dismissal of his grandfather, of his family, of his very name. And he saw Ghost, a creature of pure, unwavering loyalty, willing to stand against any threat to protect his family. In that one stark moment of contrast, something inside Joe Parker finally broke. The desperation, the resentment, the years of feeling second best, it all fell away, burned off by the raw truth of the situation. He was looking at his savior, and his savior was a snake. He was looking at his estranged cousin, and his cousin was a man of honor. "Get off my property," Joe said, his voice shaking, but not with fear, with rage. Warren, scrambling to his feet, sputtered, "What, Joe? Don't be a fool!" "I said get off," Joe roared, finding a strength he didn't know he possessed. He snatched the contracts from the floor and ripped them in half. "The deal is off." Warren stared at the torn papers, then at Joe's furious face, and finally at the still growling German shepherd. Without another word, he scurried down the steps, scrambled into his SUV, and sped down the driveway, spitting gravel in his wake. Silence descended on the porch, broken only by the sound of the wind in the trees. Harry put a calming hand on Ghost's head, and the growling subsided, though the dog's eyes remained fixed on the retreating vehicle. Harry looked at his cousin. Joe was breathing heavily, the torn contract pieces fluttering from his hand. He looked at Harry, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of shame, relief, and a dawning respect. "You were right," Joe said, his voice barely a whisper. "I almost sold his soul. Our soul." He looked down at the summary sheet of their plan, which had fallen to the floor. "What do we do now?" "Now," Harry said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "now we fight." The Port Angeles Town Hall was a historic building, its main chamber paneled with dark, century-old wood. On this Tuesday evening, the room was packed to capacity, a clear line drawn down the middle aisle. On one side sat the business owners and developers, their faces eager and optimistic, with Mr. Warren and Mr. Davies of Pioneer Logging in the front row, looking confident and proprietary. On the other side sat the farmers, the longtime residents, and the environmental advocates, their expressions a mixture of concern and defiance. Harry, Anya, and Joe Parker entered together, presenting a united front that drew murmurs from both sides of the room. They took their seats, with Ghost lying down quietly at Harry's feet, his presence a silent, calming anchor in the tense atmosphere. Mayor Thompson, a pragmatic woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, called the meeting to order. The sole item on the agenda was the zoning permit application for the Pioneer Logging development. Mr. Warren presented first. His performance was slick and polished, full of impressive-looking charts and glossy architectural renderings of a luxury resort. He spoke of progress, of jobs, of a new era of prosperity for the town. He painted a picture of economic salvation, a future where the struggling logging town would be transformed into a thriving tourist destination. He finished by reminding the council of his company's legally binding contract with Mr. Joe Parker, the rightful owner of the land. Then it was the Parker family's turn. Anya walked to the podium first. She did not speak of emotion, but of facts. As a scientist, she presented the hard, undeniable data. She explained the ecological significance of the old-growth forest, its role as a carbon sink, and the critical importance of the watershed to the entire region's agricultural health. She then presented their alternative plan, the Parker Legacy Plan, detailing the long-term sustainable jobs from ecotourism and research, the steady revenue from carbon credits, and the preservation of the town's natural character. She spoke with the cool, irrefutable authority of an expert. Next, Harry took the podium. He didn't bring charts or graphs, he brought a story. He looked out at the faces of the people he had grown up with, people who knew the land as he did. "My grandfather, Ben Parker, loved this land," Harry began, his voice quiet but clear, carrying to every corner of the room. He didn't see it as board feet of timber or plots for development. He saw it as a living thing, a legacy. He taught me that our job wasn't to own the land, but to be its caretaker, to pass it on to the next generation in better shape than we found it. Progress is important, but progress that destroys the very soul of a place isn't progress at all. It's a surrender. He spoke from the heart, his sincerity a powerful counterpoint to Warren's corporate polish. He spoke of a legacy not of money, but of responsibility. When he finished, a respectful silence filled the room. Mr. Warren stood up, a condescending smile on his face. "It's a touching story," he said dismissively, "but it is just that, a story. We have a contract. We have an economic plan that will bring millions of dollars into this community. And we have the full cooperation of the landowner, Mr. Joe Parker." All eyes in the room turned to Joe. This was his moment. He walked to the podium, his hands trembling slightly. He was not a gifted speaker like Anya or a heartfelt storyteller like Harry. He was just a man who had made a mistake and was now trying to make it right. He looked out at the crowd, at the faces of his neighbors, and then he looked at his family. "Mr. Warren is right about one thing," Joe began, his voice unsteady but clear. "I was cooperating with him. I was in a lot of trouble financially. And I was lost. I saw the trees, and I only saw the money. I didn't see the forest." He took a deep breath. "I was wrong. My grandfather's legacy, our family's legacy, is worth more than any contract." He held up his copy of the Pioneer Logging Agreement. He looked directly at Mr. Warren, whose face had gone rigid with fury. "This deal is off," Joe said. Then, with a decisive, powerful motion, he tore the contract in half. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by a burst of applause from one side of the aisle. "I am fully supporting the Parker Legacy Plan," Joe announced, his voice gaining strength. "We will work together as a family to build a future for this land that honors its past." The room erupted into a chaos of debate, but the tide had turned. Faced with a now disputed contract, a united family, and a viable, scientifically backed alternative plan, the council had a clear path. Mayor Thompson called for order. She made a motion not to approve or deny the permit, but to indefinitely postpone the decision pending a full, independent, and comprehensive environmental impact study on the entire watershed. The motion passed 7-0. It was a quiet political victory, but a decisive one. The indefinite delay, the cost of the study, and the public opposition meant the Pioneer deal was dead. As Warren and Davies stormed out of the hall, their faces thunderous, a sense of profound relief settled over the room. For the first time in a long time, the Parker family was whole. 3 months later, the autumn sun cast a warm, golden light over the lone oak meadow. The air was crisp and cool. High in the branches of the ancient Gary oak, the fortress was no longer dilapidated. Its floorboards were new and sturdy, its roof was patched, and its railings were safe. It was a sanctuary once more. Harry, Anya, and Joe sat around a small table inside, blueprints and sketches spread out before them. Lying at their feet, with his head on his paws, was Ghost. He was watching his family, his calm brown eyes reflecting the peace that had finally settled over them all. "If we build the visitor cabins here," Joe was saying, pointing to a spot on the map, "they'll have a view of the mountains without disturbing the main grove." "And the research station can be located near the creek," Anya added, making a note. "We've already secured 2 research grants from the university." Harry leaned back, a genuine, easy smile on his face. He looked at his cousins, at the way they worked together, their arguments constructive, their goals aligned. The anger and resentment were gone, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. "Grandpa Ben would be proud," he said softly. "He would," Anya agreed, a gentle smile gracing her own lips. "But this isn't just his legacy anymore, is it?" "No," Joe said, looking up from the plans. "This is ours. We're not just protecting his legacy. We're building our own." Harry reached down and stroked Ghost's head. The dog let out a deep, contented sigh. The soldier had completed his mission. He had found the lost heir, he had saved the forest, and in doing so, he had saved his family. He had finally found his way home. Outside, the great oak stood silent and watchful, its branches sheltering the new generation of Parkers as they planned a future rooted in the wisdom of the past. The true will had finally been fulfilled. Perhaps a true inheritance is not something we are given, but something we find along the way. It is rarely written on paper, but lives in the unwavering loyalty of a faithful heart, guiding us toward the family we were always meant to have. If the bond between Harry and Ghost touched your soul, we invite you to share that warmth. A simple like, a share with a friend, or a comment with your own story of loyalty helps our community of story lovers grow. By subscribing, you become a cherished member of our pack, ensuring our tales will always find their way to you. And our next story is already waiting. Just click the video on your screen to continue the journey with us.